I'm coming.
What's the, oh,
8:15. Right? Don't we have the thing on 8:15?
yeah, let's see.
Oh, you have your thing up and ready?
No, Peter Gordon's already waiting to get in.
Of course he is.
Well, I'm not letting him in yet. We still have 3 minutes.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Deb.
Hi, hi. Peter, long time no see.
Yeah, did you enjoy the Project Challenge posters and the artwork?
Oh yeah, it was just really wonderful. And the Project Challenge projects were like literally all over the map. And I enjoyed, seeing your daughters. And everybody was just very creative and very passionate about what they were doing. So it was fun to see. And it was great that they combined it with the art displays. So it's all good.
I enjoy it because I get all my daughter's friends came up to her and said, "Your dad asked really hard questions."
Well, that was just practice for this morning, right?
Right. So I was just like, yeah, you have your own presentation to teachers and your peers now. This is like a dress rehearsal.
Yeah, that's great.
We may have Lisa Luff join us as a guest because she hasn't really heard much about the middle school project, so this may give her a chance to get up to speed. But she can participate as a guest. We do actually have a quorum, but we don't have our guests, right? We have Phil and
Well, we're still 1 minute
Collier
early.
joining us.
It's 8:14, so
We're 8:14.
maybe they'll be here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure
Oh,
Phil's
my.
coming. Hi, Mike.
Microsoft 11.
Good morning.
iOS 17 says it's 8:15. Oh, there's Jim. Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's
Yes,
not
Phil.
8:15 yet. It's still 8:14. It's like a countdown clock.
And then it explodes.
Totally.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hi, Phil.
Let's just give Steve a minute. If not, we commence. We have a quorum, although I don't remember. Chad, were you here for the February meeting? Do you remember way back when?
I don't think I was.
So that means you would have to abstain on that vote, so we can't pass the minutes. Because I think you need 2 votes.
Can we move the approval of the minutes on the agenda to later?
Yeah.
Oh, here's Steve.
All right.
I don't think
so
you're gonna
we're
have
good.
to.
All right, so we'll begin, since I see our guest is online in his car and we have a quorum. So let me commence officially. Let me just get the language out here. Good morning, everyone. This is the May 16th, 2025 Educational Optimization Committee meeting. It is 8:15 a.m. So the first agenda item is a call to order, and I verify we do have a quorum. So we can move on to our agenda item 2, which is approval of the minutes. And this is the approval of the minutes from the February 14th, 2025 Educational Optimization Committee meeting, of which Steve and I attended. Any questions on the minutes? I have no questions. It's actually an introduction to our meeting for this afternoon. It involved having Slam and Colliers join us this meeting. So can I have a second? Can I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
I'll
I
second
second.
it here. And can I have a vote for the approval?
Aye.
Aye.
And I'm aye. So we can move on to the key part of our meeting and welcome our guests who we're very familiar with and always like to see and hear from, and they can introduce themselves individually. So this is the agenda item 3, SLAM Structural Engineering Report. And there's the 2 attachments that our guests and Phil will refer to as they give their update to us, and we have a discussion. So I'll let Phil and the 2 guests take it from here.
Thank you, Peter. So as you may recall, we had some uncertainty as to whether or not an engineering firm would be able to certify the renovation designation checklist for the middle school. So the board decided a few months ago that they would engage with a firm to do a preliminary analysis to ascertain whether or not that would be possible. So in late February, we engaged with SLAM to initially conduct a preliminary assessment to help us inform this decision. Based on the outcome of this assessment, the board would then determine whether to proceed with a full comprehensive renovation assessment. SLAM has completed their preliminary assessment, which included a review of existing documents, drawings, as well as a site visit to assess the building envelope, various layout, HVAC, plumbing, electrical system, etc. So that phase is complete, and today we are joined by Kemp and Jim from Colliers. Also, we have Scott and Chuck from Colliers. So at this point, please help us welcome in Jim and Chuck. I'm sorry, Jim and Kemp from SLAM.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you did get a copy of the letter. So we did go through our evaluation, and this contract was broken down into 2 pieces: the preliminary assessment, which we've now completed, and that's what the letter reflects that you hopefully have in your hands. And then the second part of this would be a more comprehensive assessment that would help with actually filing all the state paperwork potentially as you move forward with the project. So our findings were that we did feel that the building would be eligible for renovation status. There are a few caveats there, and some of them have to do with just the detail that you would have to dive into with a comprehensive assessment, which would be the next step, as well as the overall costing. I think that's a key piece of the puzzle here. And right now we've been in the building once with our engineers. We took our structural engineer and our MEP engineer with us, and there were some attachments that were made to the overall letter with a little bit more detail as to what they saw. But I think I think the letter probably speaks for itself, and I suppose we can just open it up to any questions that this group may have. We can certainly dive into some detail.
Peter, do you want to lead the conversation? And then we'll go from there.
Would you like me to?
Yeah.
So first, Jim, it's you and a second person.
Yep.
Visited the school, right?
Yeah, we had a group
Had you
of
seen the school before?
Yeah,
Four of
there
us.
there were
So
there were a
we're
group
familiar
of
with
four of
construction
us.
style.
I represented the architectural side of it, and then we had Lucien
Okay.
Draguski and Kim Simmons from Bemis Associates who specialize in the mechanical side and electrical side. And then we also had a structural engineer from SLAM, Steve Murray, that participated in the walkthrough. And we were escorted through the building with facilities too. So, and they were incredibly helpful. Those are the folks that probably know the building the best. So Mike and his crew, were incredibly helpful with just getting us in rooms that we needed to. So I think for the purposes of the preliminary assessment, we saw everything that we needed to make a professional opinion and incorporate that into the letter that you have.
Okay, right, because Scott and Chuck have seen a building over 7 years. So, and did you get a chance to review anything before time, or did you come in unbiased and just as a clean slate when you did your walk through, or did you have things to look at specifically because you saw the history of the building?
We did. We had access to the previous facility conditions assessments. So we did go through those. Some of them were, as old as, 18 years previous, and some of them were 2 or 3 years previous. So we tried to combine all those. And I think we had good information going in, and we did have a targeted list that we wanted, rooms that we wanted to see, items that we wanted to see in a little more detail. But I mean, this group has done a lot of work, a lot of legwork. There are a lot of reports that have been put together over the years. So I think there's a comprehensive package that kind of tells the story of the building. And I think from our standpoint, that was helpful walking in. There is a wealth of information to go through. So I think that was really helpful with our preliminary assessment. I think right now the question is, how do you move forward? How do you pull all of these pieces of information together, and how do you decide to move forward?
Were there any, I guess Phil and Mike, any surprises? Did they see things that we hadn't seen before, or were things in better or worse shape than previously thought? Did you guys get any surprises when you were doing the walkthroughs?
It didn't seem like there were any surprises, just the things that we've been speaking about for years. The HVAC needs to be replaced, natural light, low ceilings, the center of the building's a little dark. All the things that we've discussed in the past is what they found. There might be a few things that need to be done to get to the renovator's new status, but no surprises at all, Peter.
Can we talk about dislocation of students during the process?
Mhm.
And what would that entail, and the timing, and because that's as much a big part of the decision as anything else we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with any renovate to new project, you're going to have to be thoughtful about that. There will be phasing involved. We always try to simplify the phasing and keep the time frame as short as possible. But you're going to get into that building. It will be disruptive. You're going to find things that you simply can't anticipate at this point. From a hazmat standpoint, we've seen the AHERA reports. We know there's some asbestos left in the building. There might be some PCBs, but once you begin testing that type of material, you're going to have to address it pretty quickly. And with students in the building, you have to be safe about that. So you have to have a really good plan. So if you attack, a quarter of the building to renovate it and move the students out, you need to quarantine that piece, do your hazmat remediation, do your renovation, then move students back in. And that's one of the things that, we can't really tell you, we can't attach a cost to quite yet because the phasing plan has not been completed. And there will be dollars associated with that phasing plan, because if it drags out for 2 years, there's a certain cost associated with it. If it drags out for 3 years, there's a bigger cost associated with it. So I think this group needs to consider that pretty pretty strongly. And, I think that's something we can look at in the comprehensive portion of this. We can, determine, we can start to look at the floor plan and do some phasing plans for you. We're charged with, in the second portion of this, assigning costs. So I think that's probably the next step, and it was not part of this preliminary assessment.
No, but it's something that we have to take into consideration about what does that mean? Where do they go? How long are they? You're talking about multiple years.
Yep.
So it's certain aspects of this is, for lack of a better way to describe it, permanent, right? So it's something Phil, Peter, Mike, we really need to think about.
Yes, yeah. Oh no, someone had a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter, Chuck Warrington, I was maybe just going to add on to that as well, that with the phasings in these type of projects, also what comes into play that we just don't know now, a lot of it drives is we look at the design as well, and looking at the systems and how they're installed throughout the building. And typically we'll do that in concert with the design team and ideally with a construction manager that'll look and go, okay, not only from an operations standpoint of where do we have room, do we have space, do we have some swing space, but also looking at the systems of the building, the mechanical systems, and how we bring those online in a logical manner during that 2 to 3 year period, likely. That also comes into play when you're dealing with an occupied renovation over multiple years. And Scott's on board here for my team. He's just finishing Wyndham High School, which was a large occupied renovation as well, and taking that into account. So those are just a couple other factors as well.
Kevin, stand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. We were talking a little bit about schedule. When we were talking amongst the team earlier this week, we mentioned that a renovate to new project would likely be about a 12 to 16 month design period, and then most likely about a 3-year construction period, simply because of the phasing. It's hard to put a real timeline to it at this early stage for us, because we just started this endeavor. But if you compare that to, say, a new build, it's approximately the same design time, but then a much shorter construction time and virtually no disruption to the students, because you're building a new building elsewhere on the site.
Yeah.
You then move the students and then you take down the old building. And, we've done both scenarios. We've done very large comprehensive high school renovate to new projects while phased occupied in the past few years. We did East Hampton High School, and we've done Region 14 Nonawag High School. And they're just lengthy. That's all I can say. And there's a significant amount of cost associated with the temporary provisions you need to employ during those phasing periods. And to Chuck's point, the way we approach the design of the building is going to be specific to the phasing, especially from the perspective of HVAC.
Yeah, my understanding from reading the executive summary was, I'll put it in incredibly simple terms. You could create a speck of dust in the 6th grade wing and it will be, supplied to the 8th grade wing through the vent, right? I mean, it's sort of this interconnected web, and you can't really escape, one part of the building back to the other part of the building. So that complicates the renovate is new, right? You can't quite, I forget the term you just used, isolate the work.
Mm-hmm.
It seems it's going to affect the whole building as you proceed. And that's problematic, right? Because you may think that the 2 grades are fine as a grade gets displaced, but those 2 grades actually may get affected. So my trepidation was you may have to gut the whole building and sort of create a new footprint, not have a basement at all, but a footprint on the slab, and do all the reconfiguration of classrooms and all the renovation of the plant from the inside out. And I think Steve, where Steve was going was, then you're displacing 3 grades, and this is, you know, a modern middle school that has a team approach. What do? You can't take a whole 6th grade and put it in another place, and 7th grade another place, 8th grade another place, because they're interdependent because of the team approach to education now, right? They have to be moved together, but actually they're shared resources from 3 grades. So it's quite a puzzle. Did I describe that fairly accurately to the structural and environmental engineer on the call? That it may be hard to isolate it. It may be that you have to do a wholesale evacuation as you do the work, because you just, as you say, you don't know what you're going to dig up as you keep digging, and how the old systems that are interconnected but hard to isolate affect each other, right? Chuck, you want to have your hand up? Did I describe that fairly accurately, or was I a little too
I think it might be I think it might be a little bit in Scott, Kemp, Jim, we've all done this. That might be a little more conservative than I would maybe describe through the design process and investigation process. Kind of like Kemp described, you know, we would be looking at the existing systems and how the existing systems operate versus the new, and take that phase into account to isolate those. So we're not going to have a return air duct that's going and supplying air into an occupied area. We're going to, those would be isolated from those to prevent, I'll say, cross contamination, for lack of a better term. We want to purely isolate those systems, at least the existing systems. New systems, we might have ductwork installed, but a lot of times they're capped until we bring on, you know, the new rooftop unit that's serving an area, depending on the final design. But I don't think I wouldn't want to give the impression that we have to vacate the entire building. I don't think that would be fair. In all honesty, we typically, what we want to find at a minimum, I usually look at, can we find 6 to 8 classrooms of chunks to do at a time? Anything less than that, you're spending a lot of general conditions with a contractor or construction manager to do such a small area. So that's part of the puzzle that would have to be worked out, is where's the swing space, how much, and you want to grab enough that those general conditions warrant it, and at the same time, we're not taking forever to renovate the building itself.
And there's, if I may, there's there's another option. Again, this is where it gets complex of evaluating the design options. I mean, certainly I think this first step was important because it's a matter of, structurally, would the building qualify for renovation new? You've checked the box, yes. Now the determination is, should you do it? Can you do it? Yes. But the real question is, should you do it programmatically for the long term? And does it make sense for the community, and then can it be done effectively? Now, I know, I think it was the Tecton plan showed opening up the center of the building, demolishing the center of the building. Now, from a phase standpoint, a construction standpoint, trying to do that much obtrusive construction or in demolition in the center of a building, getting to it, and the effect it's going to have on all the surrounding classrooms probably doesn't make that viable. But there is, another option if, again, from a design solution, if you could create a new wing,
right,
you can still gain renovation status as long as you keep 55% of the existing building. So, again, a potential solution is not necessarily working within the confines of the existing structure. It may be creating a new wing, keeping 55% of the existing building that makes sense. Once the new wing is created, that gives you swing space to renovate some of the other areas. And then you hit the summers for, gymnasium and kitchen, and those are the intensive summer issues. But it really does need some concept designs to be able to evaluate that. And then again, the cost, because, as Kemp said, I agree. I think in this case, it's probably, at least a 36-month process. I mean, that's kind of been the norm. It typically adds about a year minimum to a project, new versus renovation.
Scott.
And just
go ahead, folks.
real quick, just to clarify, everything that we're talking about now in terms of the phase and determining the cost and the conceptual design, is that typically when we would see that in that comprehensive assessment?
Yes. we would-
No, Phil, go ahead, Ken, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I was going to say, part of our plan for the comprehensive assessment is to do, I think we spoke about this, do program mapping. So we have the ed spec, and we would map that ed spec to the existing building, and or, as Scott just alluded to, possibly in addition, to work with the phasing aspect of things. But yeah, we would have very high level conceptual plans to speak to, because that's going to drive the cost and the schedule.
Scott, not to put you on the spot, but I would put your own question back to you. You have better expertise than we do. To your question of should you do it, what's your opinion?
Again, I think that's going to come down to the final design solution. How many, months, again, if there is a way, and again, if there's enough available space that theoretically you're kind of downsizing or compressing the school in the end result, and this is one for the administration to look at very quickly, how many rooms could you free up? Because typically we see in these schools, when the population goes down, the teachers tend to expand out. A program that might work well in a 300 or 400 square foot room is now in a full classroom. So I think understanding initially what are the pains, how much space could we free up, that gives the design team some guidance on some of these steps. I mean, you can also look at portable classrooms, but again, all these things start adding a lot of money and time to the project, and starts from a financial standpoint driving it towards the new building.
Yeah,
And here's oh, go ahead.
Oh, Chad, I just wanted to add on if I could, because you might get a couple different opinions on this, right? Of should we go renovation versus new? And I think, in my personal experience, subject to a couple factors of one, impact to the financial impact to the district, because doing right now you get 10 percentage points more for renovation than new, unless you can demonstrate that building new is less. There's a statute you can gain those other 10 percentage points. That site criteria, right? Can we, if we were to do a new build on the site, if we could, while operations are going on, personally, I'd be recommending new. If those factors weighed out to you and said, hey, it's worth the new from a financial aspect, we could do it from the site, any environmental, wetland stuff like that, we can fit it and make it happen. One, programmatically, the existing building is just not designed to 21st century standards. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. The district's done a great job of working with it, of course. But if you were to look at new facilities now, they just look completely different. The building envelopes in a new building are much better from an energy efficiency perspective. Also, what we found is, and it sounds kind of obvious, new construction is so much more attractive to bidders and trade contractors. The amount of bids we receive on new construction, it kind of makes sense, because they're not dealing with existing conditions, right? They're in their own building. They're just, and they like getting in and getting out of a project, and say, this one I think would probably be 18 to 24 months. They'd rather get in, get out, complete the job, move on to the next one, as I think the district probably would. So it's some of those intangibles, like the cost is one factor, but then just what is the impact to your learning environment, and you're working with an existing shelf and structure versus a new, where say SLAM design a new building, you'd be amazed at what our architects in Connecticut can do with a new facility. So I would say if we could do new, I would promote new all day long.
And honestly, I think when Chuck and I toured the building, my gut tells me that, you still have to go through the process. You have to go through the exercise, because the voters need to know. But my gut is telling me it's going to be cheaper to build new.
And one follow-up question with that, and then I'm done. One of the big concerns I have about how we've operated for the last 20 years is that essentially we do a lot of kicking the can down the road. And is there a world in which this is essentially a Band-Aid? I mean, a very expensive Band-Aid, like a Band-Aid like this big, right? Tens of millions of dollars Band-Aid. but that we're in the same position 11 years from now, 15 years from now, of essentially needing a new building.
Can I expand on that? Because that was what I was going to suggest or ask. When you toured the building, was there anything you saw that said you'd better do this? That it's reached its useful life and you have to do it? Are there aspects of the building that we should be absolutely concerned about, that if we don't do something, we're going to find ourselves having issues in the near term?
I think there were some red flags that we did see walking through. And I don't know who might want, we do have our mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers on the line. I don't know if you want to elevate them. They might be able to give you a little more insight into the systems. But I think
Jem, remind me, can you just remind us who they are?
it would be Lucian Dragulski and Kim Simmons from Bemis Associates.
But Jim, while
Also-
we answer that, yeah, I'm interested in Steve's question, but let's make it a two-part thing. So the first is the thing he said, which is, were there any like significant red flags you saw? The second part is, let's say we were to renovate as new, in terms of maximal timeline of usefulness of this building, do we hit an earlier sort of expiration date than if we do new? And is essentially that putting on a giant Band-Aid for a period of years that would essentially make us have to do this whole exercise again in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah,
That's
and
an
speak to
easy,
that,
that's,
Jim?
go ahead, Cam. You're going to say what I'm going to say anyways. Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you go through the renovate to new process, the building will be certified for a minimum of 20 years. And as the renovate to new criteria checklist requires the structural system to be certified for 50 years. So if from the perspective of, is it a Band-Aid for 10 to 15 years, the answer is no. I mean, it'll look like a brand new facility, but I think some other considerations you need to think about are, right now it's a single story structure. It kind of rambles on. It's got a deep floor plate in areas, so you don't have natural light to a lot of locations. Scott alluded to an earlier architect's concept of carving out the center to get like a courtyard, to get that natural light into the floor plate. Those are all considerations. And then if you were to go new build, Scott also alluded to, a more efficient envelope to a new building. We would still have to meet the energy codes with a renovate to new project. So that's where the cost comes in, because we're going to have to, modify the envelope of your existing building to meet current energy codes. And that's not an insignificant endeavor, as opposed to if you're building new, you're doing that, from scratch as you design the building. And so you're going to get that. Also, you're probably going to get a multi-story building in a new build, and you're going to have a more compact footprint. You're not going to have as much exterior wall. So your energy efficiency is going to be improved a couple ways. So those are things to consider.
Okay.
Yeah, and one more thing that we can do, with an existing building, you're somewhat locked into the overall organization, where the pool is, where the gym is, where the music room is. And whenever we start a new project, we go through a detailed analysis of how students and staff move through the building. And I think if we did that for this building, you'd find some incredible inefficiencies. Even if you talk to the teachers about how they have to go from one part of the building, get to the cafeteria, and then back, and how long that takes them. One of the great opportunities in a new building is to be thoughtful about that and locate stairs in places in the building where they can easily move vertically up and down very quickly, or placing bathrooms for teachers in areas that make sense educationally and operationally. So right now, the existing organization of the building works against you in many senses. So even with a renovate to new, we could go in and make a bathroom, a 6-stall bathroom look brand new, operate brand new, put new piping, fixtures, everything, but it might not be in the right location in the building for 21st century learning and how the teachers and staff would want to use it. So that's some of the little things that you would be up against with the renovate to new.
Okay. And how about Steve's question?
Regarding the existing systems, is that what you're going at?
Yeah, are there any red flags that we now that you've been in the building that we have to do or will have to do in the near term?
Well, I'm the electrical engineer. I can tell you right now, your electrical system in the building is 55 years old. It's installed in the 1970s. It's very old technology. It needs to be replaced.
Yeah, I was going to say the same.
The
about
majority of the distribution in the building is below the slab. Back when they did this sort of installation, they did it with rigid metal conduit underneath the slabs, and they used the conduit for a grounding conductor. So your building doesn't have grounding conductors in it. You've got conduits underneath the slab, which have been rotting away for the last 50 years. There's probably not much left to them. You're losing your ground continuity. There's a whole myriad of problems with the existing system.
And that's a great point. When we renovate buildings like this, especially single story, and Kemp, we ran into this, I don't know if you remember, in East Hampton. We also ran into it in Brantford. Scott and I worked on the intermediate school. When you start renovating and you're tearing up slabs and putting in like the bathrooms areas or other lab areas, we end up severing so many conduits because you just never know where they're at. And that's where you get into the change orders, and it gets very frustrating from an owner's perspective of, well, why didn't we know they were there? We just don't know where they're at unless we survey all the floors. That's kind of cost prohibitive.
Yeah, the contractors know that as well. So to Chuck's earlier point about getting, favorable bids, the contractors know that they're going to find something that they don't know about. So it oftentimes does bump up bid prices, even though we estimate it early in the process from a design standpoint. We can assign a cost. Oftentimes the contractors come in and the bids are a little bit higher because they want to provide that cushion for those unknown elements.
Well, that's not surprising to hear that. So,
and again, if I may, I'm the mechanical engineer. You can do what you want to do, reuse the existing building. What you have to do, you have to start mechanical room, electrical room, and start with the services. And from whatever that location is ideal, somewhere in the center of the building, so you can go radial, shorter distance. You can go and service different areas, and everything will be above the ceiling. Pipes, ducts, conduits. And it's a relatively, from what we observed when we walked the building, it's a relatively reduced space above the ceiling. It's not that much room for all these services to put them up there, unless we lower the ceilings and just 8 feet or something like that. So I don't think that's the ideal situation.
was there anything else that jumped out at you that?
I mean, it's all. I mean, all the service. I mean, everything. It's, as Kim mentioned, all technology. Pipes are old. Boilers, or there is only one boiler that's relatively new. It's a cast iron boiler. You can have another 50 years out of it, but it's not efficient. And everything now it's 90% efficient or more, whereas what you have there in the building, it's low 80s. So nothing. We cannot reuse anything that's in the building at this point. Everything will have to be new.
Okay.
If you build as new, how long do you project a building is useful without major overhaul? 40 years, 50 years, 30, 60?
Yeah, Chad, if I could maybe take a first stab at that. The obvious, I think it all comes down to your maintenance and operations, and Mike's on the call here, right? And properly, funding, it comes down to not kicking the can down the road when we get to that 15, 20 years where the useful life of rooftop units, your mechanical systems are typically the ones that are going to expire. Your roof, typically we have about a 30-year roof, depending on what we use, but typically it's about a 30-year warranty. I think it really just comes into that long-term planning and funding it and looking at the rest of the building so you're not getting everything hit at once in your CIP plan. That if you're looking ahead, planning ahead, and properly evaluating it and not waiting for it to fail, I think it'll last a lot longer. It kind of sounds overly simplistic, but
that makes sense.
Just changing your oil and changing your air filter in your car, your tires, and rotating will make it last that much longer with that that moderate, that minimal maintenance, just the simple things that it takes to do, and being on top of it, right? Doing the roof inspections if we have a flat roof, and getting up there, make sure we're not getting leaves piled up and degrading the roof, and periodic inspections, you know, the air filter changes. These new buildings, they have a lot of parts and pieces and filters that have to be replaced, but maintaining those long term will bring that building out a lot longer, at least in my opinion. I don't know, you know, Kemp or Jim or Scott, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's usually the downfall of a building, is not doing proper maintenance, you know, in a timely way. But to answer the question, you know, I think the systems would be certainly good and work well for you for at least 20 years. Service life or life expectancy of the HVAC system, Lucian, I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit, but
Well,
of a
actually,
brand new system.
let me interrupt. I figured out how to ask a question better, finally. So the basic question is, if we renovate as new, when are we going to have to start over and scrap the whole thing and build a new building anyway? In other words, because what I think is a bad decision for Weston, Connecticut, is we do this massive renovate as new project, and we only buy ourselves 30 years, whereas if we build a new building, that new building will be good for 50 or 60 years. And so that's the kicking the can down the road thing that we never seem to really factor in. And I think we should think about that in this situation, because if you renovate new in that building and you still have desperately low ceilings and a lot of the same structural problems, you're probably going to want to have to build a new skeleton anyway, I would guess, in a generation or two. Is this logic true, or am I barking up the wrong tree with this?
I think there's some truth to that way of thinking, but you know, there are plenty of buildings out there that are 100+ years old that have been renovated, and the structure is still sound, and
Gotcha.
it's just how much money do you invest in that building to renovate it, to bring it up to current expectations and standards.
Gotcha.
And then what are the compromises? You know, Lucian mentioned everything would be above the ceiling, and the ceilings may have to come down to an elevation to allow for those systems to be up there. And so those are considerations that we would look at during the full comprehensive review.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think also just the part that where we're talking about the physical structure and all the mechanicals and the brick and mortar and systems, but it goes back to, again, as the educational model, you know, and the learning environment. I mean, the teachers are great no matter what, right? We know that, but the configurations of the classrooms and the educational model is that and Kemp and his team, they can do amazing stuff with a renovation. I can guarantee that. But with a new, I don't know, I think it's going to even be better. So I think that's the other part. That's the intangible of the educational environment that you're going to get in a new versus existing.
Yep. Right. You're starting with a clean slate versus adapting something. I mean, we can certainly adapt the existing building to meet an educational model. There may be some compromises along the way, but I don't think anything so great that you would, you know, not be happy with the renovated building. But I think the new building would be, you know, everything that you want and more, you know.
Yeah.
So those are the
I can say that we've been working with Greenwich for the last 2 years on a brand new middle school, and you know, the original analysis that we went through with them was, do they renovate that existing old building or do they build new? And they were fortunate to have some space on the existing site to be able to build a new middle school, tear down the old building. So they're in that process right now, but the educational virtues, you know, that we were able to design into that new building, we couldn't have done within the footprint of the existing building, you know. So they have student commons where they have breakout spaces, and you know, we had some deep discussions about how specialists could push in or pull out, and they were able to design the spaces to support how they wanted to teach. And you know, if you're renovating to new, you have spaces that you're backfilling programs into, and it always seems like a compromise. So
yeah, we had a similar situation in Darien as well with the Oxbridge Elementary School. You know, they they had done a relatively recent addition to that building. It was in the late 90s. But the building was single story, rambled on, multi levels with ramps between them and so forth. And the analysis was you could just get a much better educational environment with a new building. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
they're
and I
thrilled with
think to Chad's question, also looking to the future, not that a renovated new scenario couldn't be planned for future edition. I mean, again, I think if you're looking at that 50-year down the road, what have we left the community with? We see populations going down, but I think you still have to have an eye of that in the future of say, what happens if the population increases? With a newer building, you can put the charge to the architects to say, again, I'm just going to say if it's team teaching and you have one class in every level, 6, 7, 8, design it with this so the staircase isn't on the end, so there's space and it can be easily added on to in the future. A renovation solution may not offer the same flexibility from an addition that would work as well for you might be able to make the building work now, but if the population increased in the future, you might have to put an addition in classrooms off that educationally don't work well, but it's the only place we could put them.
Yep. Okay.
So we've teased out what the very well what the intent of the first preliminary walkthrough is, because I think as a group intuitively we were thinking along these lines even a year ago, but without filling in some of the contours, right? But this has given us even more insight, right? I think Steve and Chad, I can talk for the three of us. And part of today's agenda is what's the next step with respect to a deeper analysis, right? Is it necessary, and what would be the objective of that? So let's talk about that for a little bit, because it was a two-part discussion that we had in our February meeting. I started our committee meeting today with our meeting minutes. It seems it has to be fully fleshed out what the implications and ramifications for educational delivery and construction and everything else with respect to a renovation perspective. And I think Chuck and Scott did a good job last year presenting the Tecton report as a bill that's new, right? So we have a missing piece here, which is all the details of a renovation project that we're not working with. And we get that report, we go, this is not what we want to do. And we kind of knew that going in, but now we have a history and a record of that analysis, and it makes the other decision maybe more palpable for our town, right? Our taxpayers, our parents, our non-parents, and our students and our staff. So Phil, is the exercise today to say, let's do a next round of analysis to really complete the story and authorize and have it move forward. So we have that, at least we're not operating with assumptions. We have a real slam dunk, case for either way, either for renovation that's feasible with these expectations, or it's not the way you want to go. So I'll let Phil maybe take over from here.
No, that's fine. So we wanted to, of course, bring everyone here to the subcommittee just to start this discussion. The plan is to invite the group back on Monday for the full board. So those remaining members can ask any follow-up question that they have, with the goal of ultimately making a decision to move into phase 2, which is the comprehensive assessment.
Phil?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. If I could, just maybe a suggestion or a thought for that is, or I guess maybe a question to you. If we were able to give this committee, not for Monday, but maybe a follow-up meeting, a range of estimated project costs for new versus renovation, like a high and a low, with estimated district shares that could inform you what your district share would be. Would that help inform this committee whether it wants to continue to step 2, or would you still want to go ahead and do it? I'm not saying which one you should do, but would that information help you at all?
I would think so, but Peter, what do you think?
No, that's going to be the question.
Right.
That's the question.
Robert and Nina, you guys are getting a lot of us.
So here's the question though. Will SLAM be able to do that? Our colliers be able to do that without a comprehensive study? And is there a benefit in doing the comprehensive analysis? Or what should come first?
Well, I'll answer from our side, Phil, and Kemp administrated, and Jim, in your opinion too. And from our side, we could give you a range based upon what we're seeing for new construction currently and an estimated renovation cost of the existing building. We don't have an ed spec, and looking at your projected enrollment to give you a range for that. That I think we have at this point a pretty good level of confidence to share with you. And it wouldn't take a long time to do. We do this all the time. And it's that litmus test of if we're, and I'm just going to say, if we're within, say, $10 million difference one way or another, is that going to really move the needle on new versus renovate? Or, hey, if we're, and I don't think this is going to show it, and I think Kemp and Jim have already said this, I don't think we're going to be like $30 million less to renovate than building new. If anything, I think we're going to be slightly less, but that's just my gut. I like to let us do the numbers on a range, because if you say, listen, it's about the same cost, and if we can get the higher reimbursement rate, you might go, what are we talking about here? You know, or you may say, hey, let's flesh it out more for the public's purposes. But I think their letter said, yeah, we could certify it, but how much pain do you want to go through? But I think the cost factor in the impact of the district's share is probably a big carrot that you might want to know.
To me, that seems like an obvious, smart thing to do for a variety of reasons. Peter and Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, that would be exactly what we should be doing.
I was going to add sort of because this discussion is excellent. Unfortunately, I mean, I really thought it would be great to have this a year ago, but that's, we're here today. What I like is the pros and cons, right? Like, I heard a lot of cons against renovation, and it's not a bias, but I mean, you really made cases that we hadn't heard before. For example, the electrical conduit itself, I could see that just being a deal breaker, that you have to dig up the whole slab anyway. So why are you doing that, right? Because then everyone's displaced. So I like the pros and cons. So like a seesaw, right? You can spend the money on this part of the seesaw, but you have your cons, or you can spend the money on this part of the seesaw, and there's building is new is almost no risk except for financial risk to the town, right? That's their criteria. So if we can do what Steve and Chad had agreed on, and which is the right way of doing it, and Chuck, you explained, this is great, but also add sort of a list of pros and cons in either choice, I guess, that'd be really informative for the rest of our board members and the public. Because they may not even, detail you're getting into may be too much. Just that these pros and cons is enough to paint a picture of really what the choice is. Deb, did you have a comment?
Yeah. A couple. There was so much information in terms of the questions to think about when renovating. You have a wonderful summary letter. I'm just wondering if the points that you just described could somehow be written down, whether we do it as our staff, or if you feel more comfortable as SLAM, summarizing some of the specific examples and the specific concerns in terms of additional costs that renovation would entail, and the net result versus, of course, the new. And I'm just wondering, when you talk about a range of costs for renovation, I understand that. As someone relatively new to the district and even the town, I've heard numbers about what it would cost to build new. And this is a question for the group. Is that a firm, are we happy with it kind of estimate, or was that a ballpark? I'm just wondering if, in order to compare renovate versus new, are we solid with what that new build number is? It's just a question. If the answer is yes, that's great. But if it was just sort of, a back of napkin kind of thing, I'm just wondering if that would if that's enough to satisfy the public. So that would be my question, is just if we're gonna say, here's all the challenges of renovating, here's what we can honestly say the range of renovating is, because you have looked so closely at it recently and you have your experience, and then we compare it to the new number. I just don't know the history of the new number. Is that build new? Is that solid enough to do a comparison to?
Real quick, is it possible at all? Chuck, would you be able to put that together for Monday?
It might be quick, Phil. I think we started some. I would hate to rush it
Okay.
in a Board of Ed meeting, to be honest. I think because once I'd want to meet with an executive group with Kemp and Jim, yourself, Mike, and whoever else. Because once a number gets out there, it's out there. We have to be very careful of that. So I would not recommend that for Monday.
Understood. So we have, from a timeline perspective, we have 2 remaining scheduled meetings. We have one this Monday and there's one more in June. Is there a benefit with, if not everyone here, with some of the group here presenting on Monday to see what question the remaining board members have, and then have a follow-up meeting with a possible decision in June?
I don't know. It's an interesting question, Phil. I'm not sure about that. The reason being, I don't know if that discussion, if it isn't informed with a lot of very hard, hard data, if that's not just going to be sort of opening up a can of worms that has been opened multiple times and just sort of shooting holes in something before it's actually even half baked. That'd be my instinct, but I'm just one of 3 on this call.
Well, we're going to present under either scenario a number that's exceeding what the Board of Finance is prepared to deal with. Right? I mean, that's,
Back of the envelope math, yes.
Yeah, but yeah. I guess, Steve, my point is, so we've had 3 very specific deliverables talked about in this conversation. One is Chuck's suggestion of, basic numbers. Number 2 is Peter's follow-up about a pros and cons list. And then number 3 is Deb's question of how much confidence do we have in those numbers?
Well, that's
Chuck. Wait, let me just finish. Hang on, let me just finish. And Chuck said that's not probably attainable by Monday's meeting. So my response to Phil may be that perhaps we should wait until, if we can get those 3 deliverables, we can have another EOC meeting and then we present all of it in the final.
No, sure. But I'm almost certain, regardless of timing, whatever numbers we put up will exceed dramatically what the Board of Finance is considering. So that gets back to my earlier question, was if we don't do it, what's our risk? So, Kim, you're the one who pointed out we have a 55-year-old electrical system that's underground. We've already experienced, you guys weren't involved, a breakdown of our xenon plant because that was really old, and we've had a breakdown of our internet leads into the school because rats or something. I mean, if the electrical system is going to fall apart in the next 4 or 5 years, I'm surmising, I'm making that up. It sounds like it's something we need to deal with regardless. So that was my question. We may not want to spend the money. We may not believe we have the money, but we're going to have to do it. So how we sequence that is really, I'll leave it, Chad, Peter, what do you think?
Well, Kemp had an input, and then I'll give you my.
Okay.
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to comment on Ms. Lowe's question about the confidence of high-level estimates for new construction. I think that's probably where we would be most confident. And I know, Chuck, you probably feel the same way. because we have a lot of data. We, as Jim mentioned, we just finished bidding the Greenwich Middle School. It's about the same size as this project would be. And so we have very good bid information for that size building, same type of building and so forth, as well as
Yeah.
others. I think where the difficulty is going to be is the renovation piece and estimating that, because, and I was going to suggest that that's really what this phase 2 is all about, is to try and gain more confidence in what the renovation approach might cost. It'll still be a range, but you know, you could at least hone in on it better. Now, that said, we might be able to do kind of a truncated version of what we originally proposed to do. Maybe we don't do the planning component, you know, to your point, Chuck, that we do, you know, high level range of costs for renovation, and we invest some time in a few dollars as opposed to the full phase 2 amount that we had proposed. You know, that's a consideration. We could do that. And it would still not be done for Monday, but
But I mean, that's,
And we could,
let's role play this. The questions at the board level will be probably very high end, not detailed. You know, they're going to want to know, in obviously not precisely, what does a renovation cost? What does a new building cost? And what do we have to do? If we don't do anything, what's our liability in not doing anything? It's not like we're going to spend, you know, you're not going to be coming in with blueprints. I think people just need a very high level conversation. And that's, you know, this is an iterative process. And, you know, you're going to come in and say, you have to replace your electrical system because it's old and may not even exist because it's been there for 55 years. We have to do something. And we're going to have to bring the town along, because regardless of what the number is, it's greater than what the Board of Finance believes that the town can afford.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think you have an opportunity to arm yourself with some answers today that may come up a year from now, because ultimately you're going to have to go to the community and ask for funds and get it approved. And, you know, the Board of Ed might be asking some real high level questions over the next month. But yeah, I think you have to anticipate some really detailed questions from the community in order to pass a referendum and secure funding. And I think this is your opportunity to get all those answers.
Yeah, Peter, so take your lead on this and what we'd like.
Yeah, so you know, let's say if you, it's sort of like risk and uncertainty. If you ever do anything, you have incredible high risk and incredible high uncertainty, but you don't spend any money. If you renovate, you have still lots of risks and lots of uncertainties, and you may not get to the point of satisfaction, and you've spent some money, right? That's Chuck's point. If you build as new as proposed a year ago, you almost have no risk and no uncertainties, and you get almost exactly what you want, but this is the money. That kind of chart may be a good chart to capture my input, Steve and Chad's input, and Deb's input, right? And that may be what we're chasing in this meeting. And what would come out of that is let's really specify the risks and uncertainties of the middle choice, because there is not doing anything is not a choice, and not knowing whether you can build new or not is a choice. But as Steve says, it's beyond what the Board of Finance says is affordable. So sort of what you have to educate people on is the high risk, high uncertainty, and costs of middle choice. That was my takeaway from reading the executive summary. That's like there's a lot of risk and uncertainty at a real cost. So I don't know if we can do that for Monday night, or do we make that the deliverable for our next meeting presented in June?
Yeah, look, I followed the Long Lots project in Westport and what they, went through, renovate, build as new. And at the end of the day, it was kind of a push. But the dislocation of students was the one, if I remember correctly, pushed it over the line into building a new building. I would assume we would find, to earlier comments, I would assume we'd find ourselves in the same situation, rather than trying to move kids around for, the better part of 3 years.
Yeah, and Stephen, I was involved with that from the very get-go early before the building committee was involved. And
Yeah.
my initial assessment walking through with Superintendent Scarice, just again, our experience, we've seen a lot of these buildings and you know, like Kemp and Jim and Scott, myself, we can go through and go, is it at a gut, is it worth doing it? If you have the space to do it, I tell you, I told Tom, I said, just do a new building. I said, you got the space to do it. Most likely you're going to, their building is full of holes. We did, you know, if we were to take thermal imaging and go around the building and see how much energy is leaking out, like we did there, you'd probably be surprised at what you see. So yeah, similar exercise. I think that's a great example.
Yeah, no, I know how I'm falling apart physically, and I attended long lots school, so I can imagine what the school was doing.
All right, so let's wrap up.
Wait, Peter.
What if?
So are we? I'm not sure if this is going to be a part of your wrapping up. So we're going to table the discussion for Monday. Is that what I'm hearing?
I thought we would at least summarize what we talked about today, right? In some high level.
Yeah, the question, Peter, is do we just want to do it as a committee and report out what we heard today, you know, rather than asking Chuck and team to come and, you know, go into much greater detail?
Yeah, I better for
no,
Monday,
go ahead.
But we have to prepare a talking point slide, some way of walking people through what we've heard today. I don't know if Phil and I and Michael want to take the lead for the next 3 days. I don't know if Chuck representing or Jim want to take the lead and give us sort of a talking point slide. So Phil and I can present.
If I can just jump in, and I'm sorry to be a pest. For those who don't know me, I'm the Debbie Lowe, the acting superintendent, just here for another month. So sorry to kind of upset this apple cart a little bit. I think having you as experts, this is just my personal take, in terms of the board discussion, it might be more fruitful for SLAM to come back, and I'm sorry about the time it might take. But just to have kind of the same conversation you had about, tell us more about renovating and what are your challenges and how old is this stuff? You know, all the things that your questions elicited today from SLAM and from Colliers, I think was great. And I think it's sometimes helpful to have the experts on the scene versus us trying to summarize it. It just seems a little bit more just more, I don't know, I don't want to use the word transparent, but, you know, rather than us trying to summarize what we heard, just go to the source is kind of what I would think might be helpful to the other board members and maybe the public who's watching.
Yeah, I would agree with what Deb just said. My suggestion would be the following. Peter and Steve, feel free to contradict me if you don't. I don't think we should have this as we can briefly touch on it in the committee updates, like that much, a sentence or two. But I think we should wait, get the information that Chuck was mentioning and also the add-ons that Peter asked about in terms of the pros and cons list. And then we should have a thorough discussion of it where the experts, to Debbie's point, come in the June meeting and do something like what we just did, but with a little bit more certainty on some of those numbers and more detail fleshed out. That would be my suggestion. Curious what you all think.
I'm okay with that too. As long as we report in something, I think Monday night. It's been a year, and then it's been at least 3 months since we set the table for such analysis. So I say it in our committee update with an expectation that Colliers comes back with the type of work that Deb and I and Chuck and yourself and Steve described in June. So we'll do a bigger meeting in June in a sort of a update Monday night. Is that good?
Good by me. Steve?
Let's do that.
Reach out to the PM.
He's good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Extreme professionalism and accuracy. I really like that as an engineer, right? The picture is well painted with defensible engineering perspective, but also education perspectives. So let's wrap this up with that as our objective for this upcoming Monday night in a month in our June public board meeting. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and I'll move on to our.
Peter, before we adjourn, can we just like in one sentence sum up the deliverable that Chuck was mentioning, so I make sure we're clear on this? Chuck, you were suggesting essentially like dollars and cents comparison, and then Peter asked for some pros and cons. Is that an achievable thing between now and that next board meeting? Not Monday.
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
We'll work together with Kemp
Right.
and Jim. We'll collaborate on that
Okay.
From both ends, because we both have, I think, really good data that we have a high level of confidence, especially
Okay.
like Kemp said in the renovation. And I don't think it's going to bring us close. It's going to paint a picture very well. I
Okay.
think.
Great. Thank you.
Yep, not a problem.
Right. So on timing, this is agenda item for our next scheduled meeting of this is Friday, June 20th, which will be after our June public board meeting, which is fine, because given what Chuck just described, I'm sure we're going to return back to us as a group and determine what next steps we take. And part of that is, do we go down the path of a more comprehensive assessment, or do we change the parameters of that assessment? I don't know what's going to happen in that meeting, but that's my agenda item number 4. I had to go through that, and then I think we can adjourn for the morning.
Real
So,
quick,
can I
so
have
Jim, I'm sorry, Jim, Kemp, and everyone. So just to remind you guys, we're going to table the discussion for June, and we need to meet with you guys on Monday.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? I have a motion. I'll second it. We vote.
Aye.
I say we adjourn.
So move. I so
Thank
move.
you.
Sorry. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.